First time I met, I'm Ted Haycraft from Memphis, Indiana. I do some writing, moderating, big film buff. I've been at a TV station for 46 years. I started when it was film, and if I remember film. I don't think, Sam is a really, almost as a needed introduction, probably what I want to do, Sam, if we can, we'll plug your book, this book here first, and we'll talk, he's going to have some more plugs at the end of the hour, but the reason we're doing this is mainly because when I first met Sam, I was in a hotel room, and he was over, and he was talking to all these people, and I heard this Brian De Palma, this Brian De Palma, and I'm a big Brian De Palma freak. I just always have. We'll talk about how we became Brian De Palma freaks in a minute. But I just quickly went over there, and I just was mesmerized by this guy telling all these stories. He had worked with Brian De Palma, and he's going to tell us about that. And that's what this book's all about. Tell us the title of the book, Sam.
It's called Confessions of a Brian De Palma Protege, How I Shadowed the Director on Fury, Dressed to Kill, and More. This is me with Angie Dickinson in the elevator on Dressed to Kill, with her all bloody. And this was 1979. I was a baby back then and had hair. And they didn't want... Brian didn't want pictures taken in the elevator to give away the surprise that, I hope we're not spoiling stuff.
It's been long enough.
It's been long enough, yes, that Angie Dickinson is the Janet Leigh of this movie, where she gets bumped off after about 25 minutes or so. And so, I was like, yeah, but this is the Janet Leigh moment, I have to have a picture. So when Brian was on a cigarette break, the costumer was in there taking Polaroids of the blood pattern on the jacket so they could make sure the continuity of everything was good for the next shot and whatever. And so I jumped in there and I said, Alba, take a picture quick. And she said, yes, before Brian turns around, and so we posed for this little picture, and this was a big subterfuge. And of course, back then there was no social media. What was I going to do with it anyway, other than just keep it in my archive and wait to have an opportunity like this to print it. But ironically enough, when the movie was released by Filmways, back then they had lobby card sets of photos that were a set of eight of these 11 by 14s that they would have to display at the movie theaters and everything. And one of the photos on the cards was her being slashed on the hand with the razor going across the hand or whatever, and going like this. And they ghosted in a double exposure of Michael Caine. like it almost gives away that he's the bad guy. Now he's not in drag as Bobby in that, but it was like, oh my God, you talk about spoiler. And Brian was not happy that photo was the one chosen by their marketing department. But anyway, I don't suppose he'll be mad now.
Yeah, but so this book is, we don't want to probably tell all your stories because you want people to buy this book.
I did.
I highly recommend it. It's an amazing book. If you just love film, period, or if you love storytelling of a person getting into the business, or art, Brian De Palma. It's just, and your photographic, like we were talking about, this is one of Sam's old friends from college right here in the front row.
Lee Sianis, who lives here in Atlanta, shall I go into it?
Go ahead.
Okay.
Yeah, we're going to double back.
Okay.
To tell him the importance of him being here.
So, I'll be really quick as to how I became to love De Palma, and that was the first film I saw was Sisters. Totally flipped out over that, and especially the Bernard Herrmann score, just everything about it I absolutely loved. And then Phantom of the Paradise came out. I was expecting, what would his follow-up be? Yeah, look at this Phantom of the Paradise.
We have the Phantom
is here.
So
I completely fell in love with that film, and it couldn't have been more different than Sisters.
And it predates Rocky Horror Picture Show.
Yeah, and I'm like, oh my God, this filmmaker, I want to hitch my wagon to him. And so I decided, I was just going to college at the University of South Carolina in Columbia, South Carolina, and I was head of the film committee there at the student union, and we ran a movie theater on campus, and we had a little bit of a budget and stuff, and I just decided I'm going to organize a Brian De Palma Film Festival and show Sisters, Phantom of the Paradise, and then one of his earlier films, Greetings, with Robert De Niro, who had just that year, this was 1975, the fall of 75, but in the spring of 75, De Niro had won the Oscar for Godfather 2 and was now a major star. And I had never even seen Greetings, so it was an opportunity for me to even see that film. And so we booked those films for this little mini festival. And my dad owned movie theaters, so he subscribed to Hollywood Reporter, and in the production charts in Hollywood Reporter, I saw a listing for a film called Carrie. It was based on a book by an unknown author named Stephen King. And it was going to be directed by Brian De Palma, and there was a casting office phone number. So I just cold called the number, and they put Brian right on.
I may interject there. The casting of Carrie was really interesting because he was sharing casting duties with George Lucas.
Yeah.
They were casting for Star Wars at the very same time they were casting for Carrie.
Yeah, in a room like this, they were both De Palma and George Lucas sitting at a table like this, and every actor that came in read a scene from Star Wars and from Carrie.
We could have possibly seen William Katt as Han Solo,
Yep.
and Amy Irving as Princess Leia.
Yep.
The fates decided elsewhere.
It was unbeknownst to me, it was probably the most consequential casting sessions in the history of cinema. But at any rate, he got on the phone and he said, "Are you sure there's never been a Brian De Palma Film Festival?"
Keep in mind, I think, wouldn't you say that Brian really wasn't on the map that big yet?
Because Sisters
did a little bit of buzz, but nothing.
And Phantom was a bomb.
Yeah.
It didn't do well at all.
So he's not really the Brian De Palma that we know now.
No,
at all. And so he
had made Obsession, but it hadn't come out yet.
Yeah.
And it was made independently. It hadn't even been sold to Columbia Pictures yet. It wouldn't. This was the fall of '75. It didn't come out until August of '76, even though it was in the can. And so, yeah, he was not all that well known, which I guess was why they put him right on the phone. Anyway, he agreed to come. He said, "Listen, he was in California for these casting sessions, but he lived in New York." And he said, "Listen, I need some stuff at my apartment. If you can give me the airfare from LA to Columbia, South Carolina, then to New York for the weekend, and then back to LA, I'll come for the Triangle airfare." And I had told him we would fly in first class, and he said, "I don't need first class, so I think to do the Triangle airfare coach might not be more expensive than what you were gonna pay just a regular first class round trip." And it was true. So we brought him out, and Lee you had graduated by then.
I graduated. I came back specifically to see.
Yes, Lee had graduated from the University of South Carolina, and you had moved into Atlanta.
Correct.
But you came back for this, and I took Brian to a film class that Lee had been a part of, taught by Bernie Dunlap, who was this great cinema teacher, and Brian gets up there at the chalkboard and he's drawing storyboards of Obsession. He had brought a tape an audio tape of Bernard Herrmann's cues from Obsession. At that time, it was called Deja Vu.
And you all know that Bernard Herrmann was
Psycho, Vertigo, Citizen Kane.
Yeah, so when De Palma did Sisters, I love that story where he had the temp track of Psycho and Sisters, and he played it for Bernard Herrmann, and he's like, "No, take it off! He didn't want to hear that.
How can I write something original if you're putting that in my brain?
So they're getting here they get a sneak preview
of these cues. And this was November of '75, And Brian said, oh, and I recommended Bernard Herrmann to my friend Martin Scorsese, to do Taxi Driver. And that's what he was doing at that very minute, was scoring Taxi Driver. And so, unbeknownst to anybody, obviously, for those who know, Bernard Herrmann finished the last recording session of Taxi Driver on Christmas Eve of that year, the very next month, and went back to his hotel and died of a heart attack, and that was it. So we were hearing his cues while he was still alive. It still makes the hair on the back of my neck stand up.
And as we know that Brian would have kept using him.
Yes, he had already talked to Bernard Herrmann about doing Carrie. He was going to do Carrie.
Yeah.
And of course, Pino Donaggio ended up doing it after Bernard Herrmann passed away, which was not a too shabby replacement by any means. And the reason we all loved Pino Donaggio's score to Don't Look Now. And I think it was Jay Cox, who was a critic for Time or Newsweek.
Time. A big buddy of Jay.
And he was
Marty
very,
and Brian,
very,
all those guys.
yeah, and he's a big screenwriter. He's written Scorsese films and everything. He recommended that score to Brian, but Paul Hirsch, Brian's editor, already loved it. I already had worn the soundtrack out, and as soon as that name started being bandied about, it was the obvious choice. But anyway, then we had, we showed the films. Brian did, introduce them, and we did Q&A and things like that. And the climax of our little festival was doing Phantom of the Paradise at midnight, and we'd asked everybody to come in costume. It was at our little theater, the Russell House Theater, which held, I think, 300 seats, and completely sold out. Brian was the judge for the costume contest. We gave out the prizes. We're finally ready to show the movie. Everybody's pumped. And it's so funny, this gentleman said he was going to wear a Death Records t-shirt that he couldn't find today.
But you do have a Brian De Palma shirt on, don't you?
No, that's Big Round.
Oh,
Big Round.
Look at Brian. It's squashed up. It looks like it's Brian's mustache.
The movie comes on, and the very first image is the graphic of the dead bird. And it starts to rotate. There's no sound. I freak out. I race up to the projection booth, and the projectionist is freaking out. And anyway, the sound system had blown out, and there was no way to get it repaired. After midnight in Columbia, South Carolina, it was a disaster. So I had to come down with my tail between my legs and go to the front and cancel the screening and tell everyone to line up at the box office to get that money back. And I thought all the goodwill that I built up in Palma just got flushed down the drain. Nope. He thought it was hilarious. And he said, Phantom of the Paradise has been cursed from the very beginning. This is just one more thing. And he thought it was hilarious. And then he went off and did Carrie. Then Obsession opened in August of '76. Carrie opened it had the nationwide sneak preview on Halloween, or the night before Halloween in October, and then opened in markets shortly after that throughout November and December of '76. And the two films, but especially Carrie, really catapulted him to the A-list. And then I was like, damn it, I wish I had the courage to ask him to work on Carrie that summer when they were shooting of '76, because I could have done it. And he might have said yes, but I was so distraught over that Phantom of the Paradise thing, I was too embarrassed to call him. Well, now that he's like this huge director, I'm like, screw your embarrassment, call the damn guy. So when they announced that he was going to do The Fury, I called him and said, could I please come to Chicago where you're shooting on location? It'll be during my summer break between my junior and senior year. And he said, sure. As if it was nothing. So I went up there, worked on that. He had me work as his assistant on that. Then I go back to school for my senior year. And at the end, and in May, as I was just finishing my senior year, he calls up and he goes, you're about to graduate, right? And I said, yeah. He says, why don't you come up and work on this low-budget film, comedy we're doing this summer, called Home Movies. It's gonna have Kirk Douglas, Nancy Allen, Keith Gordon, and all this stuff. We're like, what? Okay. I didn't even go to my graduation ceremony. I took my last exam and jumped on the plane. Went up there, and I thought I was going to be his assistant again, like I had been on The Fury. And he said, no, you're going to be the associate producer and production manager. He just threw me into the deep end to see if I could swim. And apparently I did. And he then hired me full-time after that to become part of his production company, Fetch Productions, which was a grand total of 2 people, him and me.
And your friend here was,
and Lee.
who was driving you guys around, right? He was, going back when Palma was at the college campus.
Yeah. But Lee came up when we were shooting Home Movies in New York, in Sarah Lawrence College. Lee came up to visit the set and was actually an extra in that movie and everything. So anyway, I'm so happy you're here, my friend.
Has anybody seen Home Movies at all?
Yeah, it's very obscure
It's
film.
really
It's hard to find.
Lee was informing me it was a Laserdisc release, but that's it. They have never done an official DVD or VHS. Even the VHS, I don't think there's even a VHS.
Well, I saw it on DVD.
Yeah, did you? Oh, there's a
But it
great
was
market.
sourced probably from
The Laserdisc.
Yeah,
it's
it's
something.
probably a bootleg.
Yeah,
But
I
at
don't-
any rate, it's but then I worked with him on Dress to Kill. That was the most significant one where I worked with him from the absolute inception of him having the legal pad of handwritten out script that he gave me to go get it typed up and all the way through the pre-production and storyboarding, production, editing, release, everything. That was the one film where I really followed it from A to Z. And then also worked about a year on Blowout, but did not work on the actual shoot, because then Brian said, hey, a friend of mine, Charlie Lowenthal, who was one of his students who worked on Home Movies and was one of the co-writers of the script, he wants to direct a script that he's written, a comedy called The First Time, and he's raised half the money, but he needs a producer, and you don't need to be making coffee for me on Blowout. You need to go produce his movie and find the money. And
He's kicking you out of the nest.
He's kicking me out of the nest like a good dad, and that's what happened. So Brian went off to shoot Blowout, and I went off to make this movie called The First Time, and it actually William Finley, who was the Phantom of the Paradise and the Mad Doctor and Sisters. We got him and his wife. They were also writers. They rewrote the script, did a pass on it, and the film starred Wallace Shawn, Wendy Jo Sperber, Catherine Damon from So, Jane Badler before me, and we discovered her, and it was this little New Line Cinema coming of age comedy, and it was a great experience. And then I made a short film called Double Negative that starred Bill Finley, and was the motion picture debut of Wayne Knight, who went on to play Newman on Seinfeld, and was in Jurassic Park, and he's one of the interrogators in Basic Instinct when Sharon Stone very famously
It's a really enjoyable short. It's a real. I just watched it finally. I have an all-region player, and there's an Arrow release of The Fury that has his short on it, and 45 minutes of Sam talking. It's almost like a book lecture, and it's really cute, funny. There's a nice little ending that kind of tricked me a little bit, and I really enjoyed it. And if you have an all-region player and you're a big Sam fan and a Brian De Palma fan, I recommend trying to get that copy of The Fury, and it's got all kinds of good extras on it that's nowhere else to be found. I was going to say, my first exposure to De Palma was Carrie. I had sisters probably played The Drive-In, but I don't even know if it was on my radar or not. And then his earlier stuff, his prior to Sisters, that was very independent. Probably, I don't know what kind of distribution that had. And I was, if you guys, who is a De Palma fan here? If you're all, or just here for Sam. So we got a good. I saw Carrie, and I just was amazed and blown away by the technique and the camera work and the music and everything. I was already a big Sergio Leone fan, and I look back, and I think one reason I love Leone, I love De Palma, is because of the visuals.
Yeah.
The visuals, if you just, they're so cinematic, and these are true cinema films. And of course, we may talk, go in a little bit about the Hitchcock connection and everything, but, so I was just a diehard ever since then. And then he does The Fury, and The Fury, we get to see you in The Fury, don't we?
Yes, I'm an extra in the amusement park scene where Andrew Stevens is walking through, and his veins on his forehead are popping, and he's using his telekinesis to make everything go crazy in the amusement park. And I'm literally in every crowd scene. If, you know, oh, there's Sam right there, and they cut over here, oh, there's Sam there.
It's where's Waldo, it's where's Sam.
It's so true. It's crazy. Once you see who I am, and that I'm wearing, you know, blue denim
And a lot of red hair.
a lot of red hair.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So,
you can't miss me.
I love that the fact that Brian actually calls you for the home movies, and you know, and you established a relationship, but then, you know, he didn't ever get back with you. And he just calls you out. And you know, to know Sam is to love Sam. So Sam really made an impression on Brian to do that, because nowadays, that's right, it never rarely happens, doesn't it? But going calls like that.
Yeah, no, it would never happen nowadays, but, you know, I just, you know, he saw that I was a serious film geek and groupie of him, and you know, he just hadn't had a taste of what it was going to be like once he started to become famous and have a lot of groupies. You know, I was probably the only one, or one of very few, and so I just got in there just before.
Right, and really, seriously guys, this book is amazing. All the detail about all this time period with Brian is in here, and if you really want to really dive into it, it's all in there.
I go through a day-by-day journal of the Fury shooting. I actually wrote it at the time for Cinefantastique, and it was actually published in Cinefantastique, although the editor, Fred Clark, didn't like the movie, and he decided he really shrunk down the amount of coverage. So
It was supposed to be a cover feature.
yeah, it was supposed to be a cover. He took away the cover. I was so mad. But I saved the complete unedited version of it, so that's published in here for the very first time. And then with Dress to Kill, I go into a day by day of every single thing that happened, exactly where the locations were located and what we shot every day. It's the most detailed making of you'll ever get on that movie, and it might be the most detailed making of just about any movie. I had all the call sheets and all the paperwork and everything from that film, so I really go into my minutia on that one. And yeah, it's just, you know, I decided I wanted to be a director when I was 8 years old. My family took a trip to California. As I said, my dad owned movie theaters, and we took a trip to California to road trip to see the Grand Canyon and Disneyland and Vegas and all that. But my dad, because of his movie connections, got us a VIP tour at Warner Brothers, and I walked onto the set of The Great Race, where they were shooting the big iceberg scene with the 2 antique cars on the iceberg with Natalie Wood, Jack Lemmon, Tony Curtis, and Peter Falk, and wind machines and wave machines, and I mean, eyeballs popped right out of my head. And I saw them making also that day a scene from Two on a Guillotine, and some rear screen projection. I saw a forced perspective thing on the Great Race of Jack Lemmon's lair, this very Addams Family looking mansion on a hill that was a model, and that they were blowing up a wing of it. And the model was up on a hill in the sound stage, and then down in the foreground was a full-size gate, and the actor would come to the gate and walk in and start to walk toward the mansion, and then you cut away. But the mansion was only about 6 feet tall, and the reason I know that is because there were workmen adjusting the little chimneys and stuff on the roof. So I had a whole sense of the size of it, and I was like, this is not going to look right at all. And then when I saw the film, it looked great. So it was like a magician revealing their tricks between the rear screen projection and forced perspective and the tank with the iceberg. You know, I thought if you were going to shoot an iceberg, you'd have to go to the North Pole. So my dad had an 8mm movie camera. I just took it out of his hand, he never gave it back, and started making little Dracula movies with my brother playing Dracula with a black beach towel with a cape. and just went from there. So I was really self-taught as a director. So by the time I got to the University of South Carolina and majored in media arts and started taking film courses and making short films there, I was a little ahead of most of the other students because they hadn't really had any experience making films before. So, of course, I learned a lot. I think I learned more in the cinema studies classes where we, took a whole course on Hitchcock and
course on
things.
Hitchcock.
Yeah.
Oh,
Oh
interesting.
yeah. Oh, it was
Serendipitous.
Very serendipitous.
Yeah.
And Hitchcock, as you probably know, was famous for prepping his movies. It was, for him, the entire making of the film was really in prep, and then the actual shooting of it was going through the motions of everything that had been planned.
He claimed he was bored of the shooting.
He did claim that. And Brian was very much from that school of prepping the movies very, very thoroughly with storyboarding and everything else. And so it was so fascinating, so what I learned in school was more in the studies than it was actual the filmmaking part of it. When I started working for Brian, that was my real graduate studies, I guess, and learning how to be a director. And I got to see Brian apply all the stuff that I was learning about Hitchcock in real life and in real time, and seeing how all the prep is so important and how it all comes together. And then being on set with Brian and watching these things, it all be realized. I mean, I've directed 55 films, I've produced another 25. There's not a day on set that I am not using everything I learned from Brian, being his assistant and sponging, absorbing everything on those movies, and on every level, artistic, just technical things, even things like the first day that Kirk Douglas walked onto the set of The Fury, he started going around the room and introducing himself to all the crew members, and got their name, what do you do, and I'm standing over next to Brian, who's sitting in his director's chair, and Brian looks over at me and he looks at his watch. And then after a little while, he goes, "Kirk, we've got a movie to make here." And Kirk turns to him and goes, "I know my lines, we're gonna be out of here early, relax." And he continues and goes around introducing himself to everybody. Well, that crew, I saw in their faces how much that meant to them. It literally chokes me up, even talking about it today. And they would have gone to the ends of the earth for Kirk Douglas. They respected Brian as a great director, but as a people person, not so much. And I was like, in that particular lesson, I took away that I wanted to be the Kirk Douglas on my shoots. And so whenever I'm directing a movie, I make sure that I learn everybody's name. And at the end of the day, I go around and shake everybody's hand and call them by their name. And when I'm making a movie, the crew, we're all a family. There's no hierarchy, whether you're a production assistant or the producer. We're all in it together trying to make the best thing we can. Brian, that was, one of the things that Brian didn't teach me, or that I didn't see in him, but I got that lesson from Kirk Douglas. So in every conceivable way, it was honing how I could take the best of how I wanted to be as a director on my sets. And so yeah, it was that was my graduate school.
Right, so speaking of the Hitchcock class, so let's talk about, when you talk about Brian De Palma, it's kind of the elephant in the room with the Hitchcock. A lot of times, over the years, De Palma gets slammed for being a Hitchcock imitator, Hitchcock ripoff. He's watered down Hitchcock. And I've been wrestling with that for a long time, because when you watch Body Double or you watch Just to Kill, there are these plot elements that are just taken straight from Vertigo and the Rear Window and Psycho.
Yeah.
And you're just like, okay, how do I,
is this homage or if it's blatant ripoff?
Yeah, because, and I remember I was at a screening for, there's a movie, Kit Jones, another buddy of theirs, critic. He's a movie maker now. He did a movie called Hitchcock Truffaut. It's a documentary on that famous book.
Well, that was the book that we used in our class on Hitchcock.
Yeah,
That was the textbook.
If you put
The Truffaut, where Francois Truffaut did those famous interviews with Hitchcock.
yeah, well, I mean, like, if you put the top 5 iconic books of cinema that you should own, that's one of the books you should own. Hopefully,
That might be number 1.
Yeah.
And mine's number 2.
Yeah, Sam. we're making a case that Sam needs to go into that list of iconic books on cinema. Seriously, it is a tremendous book. You know, we were watching this, and I had a Q&A with Kent Jones after the movie, and I asked, I go, Kent, where's De Palma? You had talking heads in it, but there's no Brian De Palma. And he said, well, De Palma's doing his own, there's a documentary on De Palma coming out. And I didn't want to step on that toes and be whatever. And sure enough, there's a really, I don't know, did you like the De Palma, the Noam Baumbach? You were so, okay. Yeah. Well, the funny, I was going to say.
I know the real Brian.
Yeah, true. And then also I was going to say that really.
They make a few mistakes in there.
Yeah, I can't believe Criterion didn't go to you instead of Noam Baumbach.
Well, they said that, and Brian went along with it. I just, bad memory, or and believe me, I have my memory issues too. So I'm not casting aspersions, but somebody should have caught the fact. They said that the first time he ever used Steadicam was in Blowout, and I'm like, he used Steadicam all throughout Dress to Kill. In the entire museum sequence is Steadicam, almost all of it. And then in the subway, when Nancy Allen's being chased by the thugs, and Bobby is in there and everything, that's all Steadicam. And I,
And in
like
Obsession, does he go up the steps?
Yeah, that might also be, maybe.
Yeah.
But it was very new. The first time, I'm not sure if it was technically the first time it was on film, but I think it was Bound for Glory.
Oh, Bound for Glory.
And there's a famous shot where it goes, Steadicam,
a
helicopter comes off the helicopter and goes into a Steadicam shot. And then there's, in Rocky, going up the steps for Gonna Fly Now, in front of that museum in Philadelphia. That's a famous early Steadicam shot. So yeah, it was weird in that documentary. That kind of threw me when they were like, the first time you used it was
Yeah, never say the first for anything.
Yeah, no.
That's true, yeah. The documentary 2015 was directed by Noam Baumbach, who does really kind of dramatic, artsy, independent films. I don't see much De Palma in those films. I don't know, it's interesting. No. And his co-director was Jake Paltrow, who's Gwyneth Paltrow's brother. And they just sit Brian down. And if you haven't seen it, it's interesting because they go through his whole filmography, and it opens up the very first thing. That's the one where Kent Jones didn't put in the Hitchcock Truffaut book. It opens up about Brian watching Vertigo for the first time in 1958, and that's probably his road to Damascus, was seeing Vertigo in some ways, I guess. It kind of informs his whole career in some ways. What do you think? I'm jumping all around here. Sorry, but let's back up. What's your take on his early pre-Sisters films?
I'm not an obsessive fan on the films that he made prior to Sisters. Sisters was the first one that really grabbed me. You can see there are things like in Murder Armand and
Murder Armand is the most.
Was the one kind of thrillery sort of thing, but it's still rough. And the Greetings and Hi Mom, it's not, they're sort of scruffy comedy, satirical things, and they have some great moments. I mean, the Be Black Baby sequence is unbelievably hilarious.
For those who haven't seen it, this is in Hi Mom, which just came out on Radiant's label.
And this commentary on racism, where a play is being performed by, it's so meta and weird. I want to make sure I get this correct. The play is being performed by a black cast in whiteface. Is that the way it is?
I think so.
And then
right, and then they hire the white people who are being blackface.
I guess, and then it's one of these audience participation plays where they bring a white woman up on stage and actually rape her, and and then out in front of the theater when it's over and everyone's coming out, including the woman who's been raped, and there's a television crew, what was going on in there, what happened, and they said, it was the most amazing theatrical experience we've ever seen, and it's like, oh my God, it was so crazy out there.
There was a time when during live theater they would
they would
engage with the audience.
Yes, they would engage with the audience and just doing all sorts of experimental things. So it was just a satirical look, satirizing that whole sort of genre then.
Yeah, because another of his films he did early was Dionysus
69, yeah.
And that's
It's also on that radius.
right, and it's live.
And that had some early
split screen. Yeah, he's doing the split screen.
They were all formative films. They all had great moments, but as films, I don't revisit them.
And he's kind of doing kind of the rebel New York political scene.
Yeah.
And I see that actually with High Mama I was watching. They were all influenced by Hard Day's Night and Richard Lester was going on, and there's some Richard Lester type things in it. So, and the French New Wave. A lot of people talk about they name drop Godard with these earlier films too.
Yeah.
But the Sisters is where the Hitchcock really kicks into gear, and it just burn out.
I mean, that movie just blew me away. When it played at my dad's theater, and the poster I saw first, that has a review quote on it. I put the poster in here. It was so intriguing to me because it has a review quote. Well, first of all, it's American International Pictures, which up to that time,
driving stuff.
They rarely had review quotes on their posters because they were not going after movie critics. They weren't after highbrow anything. It was just exploitation movies, Vincent Price Poe movies, of course, but it was Beach Blanket Bingo and a lot of exploitation stuff. So this review quote for the Hollywood Reporter: the most genuinely frightening film since Hitchcock's Psycho. And I read that and I'm like, what? How dare they? How could anything even come close? But then I saw in tiny print, the smallest credit of anybody on here is music composed, conducted by Bernard Herrmann. And I'm like, wow.
For an AIP film.
For an AIP. I mean, like, So I went in very intrigued, but skeptical, and was just totally blown away. And one of the things that was not at all, he very much took Rear Window for the sequence of the big murder that happens in the beginning, where the murder's happening in one apartment, and Jennifer Salt, who plays a journalist, is in an apartment across the way, witnessing the murder, just like Jimmy Stewart in Rear Window. And of course, obviously that's stolen. However, De Palma raises it to this whole new, fresh level of adding split screen. She calls the police, comes down to the street, the police, she's written some anti-police articles, and they know her as this journalist who calls them pigs, and they don't want to give her the time of day. They don't believe her story that she saw a murder, and she's like, I saw a murder in that place. You've got to go up right now. And she's arguing with them, and that's on one side of the split screen. The other side of the split screen is William Finley, who plays the doctor, who's the Phantom of the Paradise, is helping clean up the murder, and on this side of the screen, and it's like this very suspenseful thing. Is he going to get it cleaned up in time? Are the police actually going to go up? And then she finally convinces them to go up, and the camera starts to follow them into the hallway, into the elevator, and he's still got a lot of stuff to clean up. Oh my God, are they going to do this? It was an incredibly suspenseful sequence. And when the two split screen cameras finally meet, they arrive at the door, and then the door to the apartment opens, and there's a camera inside the apartment seeing the door open as well. It's like the two come together, and literally, he's just barely gotten everything cleaned up. I just thought that was the most amazing split screen I've ever seen. And De Palma's gone back to that well many times to do split screen. Never as effectively as it was in Sisters, in my opinion. And there's sometimes when he does it, and I just don't think it works at all.
Well, he even admits it doesn't work at the action sequence of Carrie, the prom.
Yeah, they minimized some of that split screen, although I don't mind it, but I'm glad that they didn't overdo it there.
He thought that action, just plain out action doesn't really work with split screen as opposed to like the sister sequence where you got these two.
Yeah, he did one, was it Impassion? One of his late...
Second to last film.
Second to last film, it made no sense at all. It just had no reason to be there in any way, shape, or form. There was nothing that was added by it. And so I question whether he even fully understands why it was so good in Sisters. To me, it's very obvious, but anyway, I thought it was brilliant.
Yeah, we were talking earlier at another panel about old man films, and Quentin says, I don't want to be an old man making films. And some of the old man, when they're older in your career, some of the films are questionable, but it's not, you can't make that a definite statement, because there are some really good films done by men in their 80s and 90s and stuff. But I would say with Brian, his last two films have been kind of the weak side. I don't know if he's going to rally back or this is it for him.
I'm not sure. There was talk of him doing a film this year, but it's yet to start production as far as I know.
Right. But even the Hitchcock, I was going to say, Brian claims, in what things I've read, and I was doing some research, and I've been doing research on Brian ever since I saw Carrie. But he took the film grammar. Hitchcock invented a certain type of film grammar, and he's taken that grammar and further down the road, he's taken it further. Yeah. And he plays with those.
Well, certainly did in this case with adding the split screen and giving it his own spin. And I thought that was one of the better uses of stealing from Hitchcock.
And a quote I came across too. I think Hitchcock might have said it. As logic is dull.
Yeah.
And so, when these, Brian always gets these raps, how silly it is, or how over the top, or it's a style over substance. But that's part of cinema. And if it's done right, it's just the pure cinema that you can do.
Well, there are some plot holes in this film that you could drive a truck through. One in Dressed to Kill that comes up very, very often is after Angie Dickinson has sex with the guy and she leaves the apartment and gets on the elevator and goes down the elevator and realizes she left her wedding ring in there, and she goes back up. When the door opens, there's Bobby with the knife and comes into the elevator to kill her. Now, there would be no way that Bobby would know that she's going to forget her ring and come back. But when you're first seeing the movie, you're not dissecting it in that way, and so it just kind of goes right by. But then when that's pointed out, and you're like, oh yeah, it is, it's a bit of an odd coincidence, or it's a lapse in logic.
Right.
And there are a few others like that in his films that, but you question Brian about it. And it's the same thing that you were just quoting. What is the quote?
Logic is dull.
Logic is dull.
Anybody out there has a favorite De Palma film that they really would like to talk about, or are they interested in? Yes.
Well, the first film I ever saw when I was almost an infant was Sisters. So that's not a great. Like, my mom was a big horror fan, and so she didn't take me to see The Exorcist, but she took me to see Sisters. And also, I've lived on Staten Island.
Oh my God.
And as we speak, my cousin Audra lives in the building where Sisters took place.
Wow.
So that the movie has always followed me that way.
That is wild. How old do you think you were?
I'm pretty sure I was 2.
Oh,
You actually have memories of it?
Yeah, I have total recall memory, unfortunately, so there's 53 years of memory.
Oh, wow.
Wow.
I remember how painful it felt when the knife goes up the cake.
Yes.
And the blood.
Yes.
I mean, 2-year-olds should not have seen that.
Yeah.
It was intense, but I love that film. It gets funnier,
Yes, there's so much. De Palma has a lot of humor in his films, and especially in that and others. The cake that you bring up, the bakery scene, those bakery scenes are hilarious. And the main woman who behind the counter is not well-known actress. But her assistant is Olympia Dukakis in her first film.
Yes, okay.
And then the mother of Jennifer Salt has very funny stuff. And she's played by Mary Davenport, who is actually Jennifer Salt's mother in real life.
Oh, okay.
And then when we were doing Dress to Kill, well, actually, when we did home movies, Mary Davenport had a much bigger part as the mother of Keith Gordon in home movies. And then when we did Dress to Kill, the scene at the Windows of the World, at the World Trade Center restaurant, where Keith Gordon and Nancy Allen at the end of the film are having lunch, and they talk. Keith Gordon is explaining how they do penectomies with sex change operations, going into gory graphic detail, and a woman at the nearby table keeps looking over every time we're saying something, and that's Mary Davenport. And Brian just asked her to come in as a favor to do that. But Mary Davenport's husband and the father of Jennifer Salt was the great Waldo Salt, who won the Oscar for writing Midnight Cowboy, and he wrote Day of the Locust, and many other great scripts, and was a terrific screenwriter. So, and then Jennifer Salt, who, in case you don't know, she was the main journalist who was trying to get the police to come up. She went on to become a producer on a lot of Ryan Murphy miniseries and American Horror Story and all kinds of stuff. And a lot of his stuff is very De Palma-esque, and I'm sure that they have lots of to talk about.
That's the TV. I was going to say that the influences. Like I said, I was watching some videos and doing some homework and stuff on Brian, and the influences that you can still see M. Night Shyamalan, or I call him Shyamalan Ding Dong. Sorry. B.T. Anderson even, or obviously Quentin has a scrapbook of clippings that he did. He would cut out all the reviews and movie ads,
Quentin Tarantino's favorite scene in the history of cinema is the Be Black Baby from Palma.
Yeah. It's very intense. It's an interesting sequence. Wes Anderson, believe it or not, Edgar Wright, Del Toro, Guillermo del Toro, and then I put the Bomb, like I said. I think they should have, he's doing some of the Criterion extras, they should have talked to you about it. So what are some of the other, overall, is there anything that else sticks out that De Palma, after you left his?
Yeah, I left, just as I said, right when Blowout was starting to shoot, and then he did, after that, he did Scarface, Body Double, Wise Guys, which was not very good, actually, Untouchables, Casualties of War, Bonfire of the Vanities, which kind of...
And there's a book about that, the homemaking of that, if you really want to know the ups and downs of that whole production.
Yeah, and the interesting thing about that book, and let's keep this within the walls of this room, it was written by, what's her name?
Julie Salomon.
Julie Salomon, who was a journal, it's called The Devil's Candy, on the making of that film. She had been given access to be on set. She was a huge respected journalist from the Wall Street Journal and everything. And Brian gave her full access to the set. And then she basically writes this Mommy Dearest, warts and all, takedown of everything that went bad on that set. Now,
and by the way, if you want to hear great stories of Hollywood, go to Sam's table during the weekend.
They're all the secret.
I love here. It's interesting to look at the pattern. So he bombs out. Bonfire of the Vanities is just a huge turkey bomb, a disaster. So what does he do? He redoubles back on what he's familiar with. He does Raising Cain, small thriller. And that's an interesting history too, because now it's got a different cut by a fan. Right, they've done a fan cut of that film.
Oh wow!
So, yeah, it's out there in the Shop Factory. And then he does Carlito's Away, and everything always repeating Scarface. But I think it holds its own on its own unique. And in the documentary, Brian, he says, it goes after that film, because I don't know if I can do any better than that. That was pretty much. But I love the fact that he gets the Mission Impossible.
Then he does the first Tom Cruise Mission Impossible.
And makes a boatload of money and gets credit for that. But then he's hired at Mission to Mars. I think they fired the director, and he inherits that film, and then they find that the budget can't do what he needs the budget to do, so that gets, I like the Fatale, I don't know if you're a fan of that or not.
To be very honest,
After,
I mean,
yes, no, you don't have to, no, respond.
my favorite is Carrie. It will
Yeah.
always be Carrie.
Yeah.
Carrie is my favorite De Palma, my favorite Stephen King, and top 5 films of all time, it's gotta be on there. I mean, I think Carrie is a perfect film.
And it's got so
I've
much
seen it
going on, it's heartbreaking.
every time I rewatch it, I've probably seen it, I've lost count, at least 50 times. I'm gonna see it again next Friday in Portland, Oregon. I'm going up there for the 50th anniversary screening, and Nancy Allen will be there to introduce it and do a Q&A. And I can't wait to see it again with an audience. I love seeing that film with an audience. And I saw it at the night of the sneak preview, the nationwide sneak preview. It was at my dad's theater at that time I was at Columbia, South Carolina, going to school. And it was at the Jefferson Square Theater, which was one of the newer theaters, more state-of-the-art. Full house of people at midnight on Saturday night. That year, Halloween was on Sunday, so this was on October 30th, on Saturday night. I will never forget it. They had special posters made up for it with the date and time. And nobody knew what it was gonna be. De Palma wasn't that big, although Obsession had come out, but Obsession wasn't in the zeitgeist of wasn't Jaws or Star Wars or anything. So, but for whatever reason, people came out for this. And that movie, that audience ate up every single bit of it. And then in the final moment when Sissy's hand comes up, out.
How many people jumped out of their seat when they saw it last time? Yes.
Listen, I still have permanent ear damage from the collective audience. There were 400 people or something in that theater screaming at the top of their lungs. So the whole roof of the place blew off. And that was happening not only at our theater, but at every theater across the country. The word of mouth, when we spilled out into the lobby and out into the street, people had to be looking at each other, talking to each other. Oh my God, did you see? I mean, and it didn't, back then, movies didn't open all on the same date. And so it opened Wednesday or Friday or whatever in Los Angeles and New York. But it didn't open in smaller markets like Columbia, South Carolina until December. And so it had over a month of word of mouth going around, and everybody who was in that theater couldn't wait to go back to get scared again, but also to bring all their friends who hadn't seen it, to expose them to it. And then it stayed for weeks until Christmas Eve when we were contracted that we had to open A Star Is Born, the Barbra Streisand movie. And so we had to take it off even though it was still doing great business. But it was just, as far as a sneak preview, I don't really know of one that was this effective. And it also put into the minds of the studios, Halloween, horror movies, we should do something. And within 2 years, John Carpenter's Halloween opened on Halloween. And now every year, there's always something that's open on Halloween. Yeah.
We're almost out of time. Any questions for Sam that we do? Okay.
You mentioned your cameo in The Fury several times. You were on the set, and years ago, Jim Belushi was on Letterman.
Yeah.
And there's the beach scene with Amy Irvin, the other actress, and Jim Belushi makes his cameo. He's in that sequence about 6 or 7 times. And I was just wondering, was there any comment during that time with Brian De Palma?
Belushi was from Chicago and had been in Second City, had John Belushi, which was their, groundlings or, improv theater group and everything, and he was just cast along with the other extras and everything. And, nobody really knew much about him, although, his brother was huge on Saturday Night Live at that time. I've got a frame grab, and there is Jim Belushi on the beach right there. And is, you're paying attention to Amy Irving
Yeah.
and Melanie Thomas. And Melanie Thomas, who was from Marnie, another Hitchcock connection. She was a little girl. And, but anyway, but Belushi's definitely on the beach there, but no lines, just background.
Yeah.
I have a tiny walk-on a run-on in home movies. When Keith Gordon falls out of a tree, I'm a pedestrian who runs over to check on him. And then in Dress to Kill, when Keith Gordon sets up a time-lapse camera, 8mm camera or whatever, on his bike that's tied to a tree outside of Michael Caine's psychiatrist office, he's filming the patients going in and out because he suspects that one of his patients might be the murderer. And so we had lots and lots of extras that were going in and out, and I became one of those. And for some reason, they didn't use me. So I'm really pissed off about that. But at any rate.
I think you got a question over here.
When can we expect the Criterion version of your home movies that you made as a kid?
Never. Way too embarrassed.
Do they still exist?
Yes.
So next
Never
year,
really seen the light of day. Actually, and they wouldn't even be legal because 2 or 3 of mine are remakes, unauthorized remakes of some of Robert Bloch, who wrote Psycho. He wrote a couple of those anthology films that Amicus Pictures made, like House of Drip Blood, The Final Tale called The Cloak, that had Ingrid Pitt and John Pertwee, the Doctor Who guy. I did a remake of that, and I also did Asylum, which was another one of those, and I did a remake of Lucy Comes to Stay with Britt Eklund, the one with Britt Eklund and Charlotte Rampling, which is very Hitchcockian because one of them turns out to be, in the other one's an imaginary figure, and Lee is in that film. But I would not, I actually won, I think for that film, I won the Mario Award at the University of South Carolina for Best Student Film, but I couldn't legally even show it because I don't have the rights to the story or anything. So, yeah. But also they're silent. I would post-dub them, but you never could quite sync up the tape recorder. It was just, it was very primitive. And
we'd love to see them.
yeah, well,
Anyway, one last
after I'm
question.
gone, somebody will maybe find them in my garage.
Anybody have any other questions? Yes, sir.
I'm not sure of the timeline sequence, but were you involved in any way in that write a screenplay for the Palma contest?
Yes, I was.
Take One magazine?
Okay, so, yeah, it's in the book.
Okay.
In Take One magazine, Brian decided to have a screenwriting contest for what became Blowout. At the time, it was called Personal Effects. And he had kind of a treatment, and they printed the treatment in the magazine, and then they asked screenwriters to submit a couple of scenes, or 2 or 3 scenes, as samples of their work, and then Brian would choose maybe, I think it was the top 3, and then they would write complete screenplays, and then Brian would pick the best, and they would get a prize of, I think, $5,000 or something like that. And so when the submissions came in, there were a ton of them, and the magazine, Brian said, let the magazine go through the huge amount of them and narrow it down to like 10 or 20, and then they sent those to us, and then Brian assigned me to read them to narrow it down further, and I would do little script reports on the scenes that were written, these sample scenes. And then I came across one from a guy that I knew from my school, from USC, who had actually won the Mario Award for his student film the year before I won mine, which actually made me rabid when I saw him win that trophy. I'm like, I'm going to win that if it's the last thing I do. But it was his, so I went into Brian and said, I don't feel comfortable. I need to recuse myself on this one because I know him and I don't want to be partial or anything. And so Brian said, well, that's fair. So leave that one with me and I'll read that one. Well, they chose the three, they went off and did their scripts, and then the one that Brian chose was that guy. Now, I have no idea if me bringing added attention to that particular name or whatever else, and that Brian was the one who read the scenes for, I have no idea. It could have affected the outcome, but at least I wasn't personally involved in being partial. But anyway, he did win. Unfortunately, Brian used nothing and didn't credit anybody. The thought was that they were going to then collaborate with Brian on the final draft and share screen credit and everything. None of that ever happened. And
Brian ended up getting so credited himself solely.
Yeah, Brian is solely credited. And one of the other two finalists was getting ready to sue Brian about it. But there was really no leg to stand on, and all the paperwork that they signed was very clear that, that you didn't have to do anything. And anyway, it was kind of an ugly mess, and it was, Brian wanted to think of himself as a great mentor to students. One of his best friends was Spielberg, and Spielberg had Robert Zemeckis and Bob Gale, who he was mentoring and got them their first film, I Want to Hold Your Hand, and then that led to Used Cars, and then that led to Back to the Future movies. And, Brian kind of saw his students at Sarah Lawrence College that led to Home Movies, the low-budget film, where a lot of them worked on it. He was sort of mentoring them, but then when Home Movies bombed, he kind of tossed all of them aside, except for Charlie Loventhal, but then he sicked him on me, and had me go off with Charlie, and barely really had anything to do with our movie, because he was busy with Blowout. And then in this case, it was just the follow-through wasn't there. He had his instincts to help were good in the beginning, but he didn't have the follow-through. And that, unfortunately, kind of bit him in the butt on that Blowout thing, because there was some negative publicity, and the magazine had gone out of business by the time, Blowout came out, and it was just all a mess.
Well, we're out of time, but before you leave, please, it's plug time.
Okay, yes, first of all, the stock that I brought has been selling like hotcakes. I only have a very, very limited amount left, but when you do buy it at my table, you get a free copy of this magazine, The Dark Side, from the UK. And I wrote the cover story, and there's my name on the cover, and it's Dressed to Kill, and Angie Dickinson. It's a cool little side piece for the book. And the book is 40, but as I say, I only have a few left. I'm going to run back to my table. What time is it now?
It is now 12:37.
Okay, I'm going to run back to my table for literally 10 minutes, because I've got a 1 o'clock panel where I'm going to be doing a dramatic reading of my superhero alter ego, Captain Samouflage, and this is a little parody of those little golden books. And this is $20 at my table, and it comes with a whole grab bag of goodies, including a Captain Samouflage gingerbread cookie. But anyway, I am going to do that, and I encourage everybody to come and hear me ham it up as Captain Samouflage at 1 o'clock. But I have to run back to my table, actually change into my Samouflage mask and hat. But while I'm there, I'll be happy to sell you copies of the Confessions of Brian De Palma Protege and sign those before I race over to do this.
Everybody, give a big hand.